chat and learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into another hour with you all. We have a beautiful guest speaker who's joining us, who's going to drop a lot of knowledge today. I see that some folks are already joining us, eager to participate, turning cameras on. I see folks with pen and pad there, ready to take notes. So before we roll into the questions that you all have submitted previous to the conversation, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. So of course, you could be doing anything else with your time, but you're deciding to be with us. So I invite you to be present with us, close out your tabs, stop multitasking if you can, so that you can chime in the chat box, or you can hop off mute. We really want you to maximize your time with us today. So with that said, I invite you to turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. I see a couple folks already doing that. So of course, digital fatigue and video fatigue are real these days, but we would just love to have you participate by turning your camera on if you feel called to do so. This is a safe virtual space. Also, I've muted everyone upon entrance just to avoid any background noise, but I can't stress enough, we want to hear from you. So feel free to hop off mute whenever you have something you'd like to share. I just ask that everyone be respectful of everyone on the call here today. Let's try to have one person off of mute at a time. And you can flag me, you can raise your emoji hand, or you can write in the public chat, or write to me privately letting me know you want to hop off mute. If you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. And if you signed up for this chat, be looking out for an email that will give you the link to rewatch this video, and then you can share it with your community, your coworkers, your friends, and they can get the knowledge as well. So be looking out for that rewatch email. If anyone has any sensitive information and you prefer to be kept anonymous, you can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie, and you can write to me privately there, and I'll raise your question or your reflection to our guest speaker and keep you anonymous. The final thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow Power to Fly on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store. And if this is your first chat where I'm moderating, I'll just take a couple seconds to introduce myself. So I love facilitating these conversations, and I love bringing our awareness to how we can deepen our emotional intelligence. I mean, there's so much we can talk about with how we can practice emotional intelligence in the workplace, at home, with our community. So I might bring some of my reflections there. And if anyone wants to philosophize with me on emotional intelligence, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I invite you to support my project that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org and sign up for our newsletter, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speaker, Silvana. I'm not going to read what's on the screen here because we want to hear from you. So please let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today. Thank you for being here, by the way. This is such an honor.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here. I've heard so many great things about Power to Fly, so I really am honored to have received this invitation. So my name is Silvana Montenegro. I am the head of Advancing Hispanics and Latinos globally for JPMorgan Chase. What that big name means is that I get to spend 24 hours of my day thinking about ways in which we can support our employees and our communities who are Hispanic and Latino. So that's a true honor. I've been with JPMorgan Chase for 24 years. And throughout those 24 years, 17 working with the Latin America region, took a 6-year break from Latin America, but came back because we always come home. So very passionate about our community, and it's really a pleasure to be having this conversation today with all of you.
Beautiful, beautiful. So actually, I didn't ask you, where are you calling from today, Silvana?
I am from New York, believe it or not, within one of our JPMorgan Chase offices. I know this background is tricky, right? But it really is a small office.
Great. It's good to have you today. In just a few moments, I'm going to read where people are calling from, because I invited folks to drop in the chat box where they are in the world so we can see the power of global community here. But before I shout out where folks are calling, I'd love for you to talk about some of the principal themes for today's conversation. And you can just read what's on the screen, or you can dive in deeper before we go into the questions.
Yeah, sure. So next steps to bridge the racial wealth gap, importance of building a culture of inclusion, and the role communities play in this transformational process.
Awesome. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can pull up the awesome questions that folks have submitted previous to this conversation. And I just want to say, if you submitted a question and you hear a question come up, let us know that you're here live with us. We'd love to just say hello and thank you for submitting the question. If you have a question that comes to mind that you didn't get a chance to submit, please drop that in the chat box, or feel free to hop off mute. We'd love to hear from you. As I said in the beginning, we really want you to participate here. So before we roll into our questions, I'm just going to shout out where folks are calling from. So I'm calling from San Martin de los Andes in Patagonia in Argentina. We've got Buenos Aires, Argentina on the line. We've got New Jersey, Chicago. We've got New Orleans. We've got Los Angeles, San Jose, California, Washington, D.C., Denver, Colorado. Beautiful. Great. So if you're just joining us, go ahead and drop in the chat box. Let us know where you are in the world. And that way our guest speaker, maybe she knows something going on where you're living and she can kind of add some flavor to that response there based on where you are today. So let's start with this first question here. What are some of the barriers keeping Latinx families from building wealth?
I think there are a few, right? I think the first one that really comes to mind for me is lack of access to capital. And when I mean that, I'm thinking primarily related to building assets, right? So home ownership. I think many people in our communities are not able to buy a home, and therefore their families do not inherit a home. So the generational wealth gap is something that really is at play. I think the other thing that comes to mind is we don't talk about financial wellness at our dinner table, right? And with that, I think there is in many communities, right? I cannot speak for every single Hispanic in the world. Financial health education is not something that we learn naturally. It ends up being something that we either seek to learn from at a later age or we just never learn. So I think it's interesting because at the end of the day, by us not having access to that financial education, in many situations, like we are perpetuating some of the challenges that we have around saving. I have one of my esteemed colleagues who said something that really stuck with me. And she said, Latinos, thinking about the US, right? We're probably one of the biggest spenders and contributors to the economy. Wouldn't it be nice if we were also known as the best community to save, right? Because that's not something that we do as well. So I would say in a nutshell, I think there are many barriers, but the most important thing is it's never too late to start. Right? Today is the day. It doesn't matter how old I am, if I'm a child, if I'm in 20s, later on in life, anything matters. Even if I put out $1, 3 pesos, 2 reais, it doesn't matter, right? As long as we build the discipline of saving, it will pay off in the future.
Thank you so much for being transparent there. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of development as you've built your career, and specifically researching and sharing more about this topic. So just a personal question, have you seen, or what have you seen in the most recent years that you want to shine a light on? Because I love that you're bringing this to a positive note. You're saying, even if you just save $1 or 1 or 3 pesos, start small. Because of course, this kind of topic can really be overwhelming and heavy for a lot of people, especially since, our system hasn't really set up the tools, like you said, with education and just in general in the community to learn how to have financial wellness. Can you highlight something that you've seen over time that you are proud of, that you want to just let people know that there's hope, we can stay positive about this topic?
I think a couple of things come to mind. One is, I think companies and small firms like fintechs are being much more intentional around putting the financial health education front and center, right? Even us, as I think about JPMorgan Chase, we have in our website more tools and resources around how to build a budget, how to save. Like if you're a client, you can set up a feature on autosave. There are articles. There are much more resources available out there. And I think this is a result, quite honestly, of the evolution of where we are, right? I think we talking a lot about the racial wealth gap. I think is one of the drivers of that. I think also the fact that when I think about the Hispanic population, we are growing at a tremendous rate, right? It's 62 million people in the US are Hispanics. So I think all of that combined is leading to more intentionality. And the intentionality is driving products, is driving information. And I think that's very positive. But I think going back to us, it takes our discipline, right? Even myself, and I do this for a living, I work in a bank, I have to control myself, right? I have to think about it. You have to focus. It's not easy. It's easier to spend than to save.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that response. I wanted to throw that in there because I definitely agree with you. A topic that I love speaking about, we don't have to go into it now. We can maybe have a tea time offline. But I really feel that because of, we go way back to colonization and just how a lot of the traditional ways of learning and sharing and growing have excluded, a lot of different cultural values, let's say. And so we have to relearn and unlearn to relearn. And so I love that you're saying it takes dedication and it takes practice because it can be hard sometimes. I would love to move into the second question that speaks to business leaders and development. So cultural inclusion starts from the top down. How would you guide business leaders to display inclusive behavior?
I think, and I'm not trying to oversimplify, but I really believe this. I think it's about the very small things that we do or do not do day in and day out. One of the things that I've learned that I am very passionate about, right? So the Neuro Leadership Institute has done some research that actually demonstrated that for our brains, getting a punch in the stomach or feeling excluded is the same. So bottom line is when we feel excluded, it physically hurts, right? When I learned that, I think it really changed how I think about it, because as humans, if we think about it, like I'm talking with you, Mariela, and I'm smiling, and you're smiling back. We're sending signals to each other, right? And we're sending signals to other people 100% of the time. If we greet them, if we don't, if we have a sad face, if we ignore them, and all of those signals are unintentional. But the truth is, when we're sending signals, people are capturing signals and it's triggering a reaction in them. Whether they are conscious of it or not, it really doesn't matter. But if I think about it, the more I am aware of how I'm sending signals to others, the more I'm going to be including them. Therefore, I'm going to be driving more engagement from them. So when I say the small things, I think what I'm really referring to is how do I introduce people, right? There is a big difference if I say, oh, this is Mariela, she works with me. Or if I say, this is Mariela, do you know that she's super cool? She has developed this website and she's super, people are like, oh, I want to know more. Or if somebody greets me and asks me how you're doing, I respond and I ask them and I listen. I think, somebody's quiet in a meeting, we ask them for their input. I really think that it takes effort, right? It's easier sometimes to put together a huge program, but my advice has always been to senior leaders, and myself included, because, nobody's perfect. Pay attention. Look at facial expressions. Right? I think it's really about the small things.
I agree 1000%, because in the small things, we find a lot of emotional intelligence, let's say that active listening piece, right? So it just happened to me yesterday. And it doesn't matter the language. So I'm here and I go, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Todo bien? And I'm automatically saying, everything's okay with you, right? But I didn't take the time to really ask and listen. And the response was beautiful. The response was, well, here in Argentina, everything is always crazy. Today, I would say it's pretty okay, and they generated this kind of humorous response to my question that was pretty superficial, because I've been trained to just say, hi, how are you? Everything okay? Good. Moving on to the next. So as leaders, of course, you have so many things to do. you've got a company to keep, above ground. And so it might seem like you're losing time to practice active listening. But like you said, the little things go a long way. So I'm really happy that you raise that to our awareness.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's move on to this next question here. Okay, so what are the biggest issues facing Hispanic business owners? Do any of these directly affect or prevent the growth of their businesses?
I would say it's not very much dissimilar to the barriers faced by individuals, right? I think it also boils down to access to capital and in some extent cultural, right? So when we look at, and I have US stats, right? But I know in our countries, there are many more stats that we could reference. But when we think about Hispanic business growth, Hispanic-owned business growth in the US for the past 10 years, 34%. 1% non-Hispanics, right? When we look at revenue growth, Hispanic-owned businesses are growing revenue at a faster rate. However, when it comes to the point of getting access to capital, Hispanics are less likely to get loans, especially when they hit a threshold. So with that in mind, what happens is that even though we have very talented Hispanic owners, their companies may end up not growing as much as their potential. I think the other part of it, which I think is a huge one, is around trust, right? If I don't trust that I can go and get a loan because I'm going to be in trouble if I do so, when in fact, we need capital to grow the business, what's going to happen is that you end up waiting years and years from your personal savings or asking for, family, friends, and then you're limiting the potential to your business growth. So I think it's a couple of things. Like one is systematic, and I think the other one has to do with our culture.
And so what are some small things we can do to try to help our culture, let's say from the cultural sense, adopt new ways of looking at things differently? I know we can dive in deep with education, of course, and just accessibility. But we have, of course, if we have the privilege to have technology, because many people don't even have that privilege to buy and own technology. So how can those of us who have technology, who want to, be a drop in the pond, to have some sort of ripple effect, what are some things that we can do to help change the narrative, maybe using our resources? I mean, you're mentioning resources. Someone listening now, what can someone do with their resources? Social media, I don't know, technology, their voice at work. Can you give us a couple of tips?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really about sharing knowledge. To your point, like social media is great. We have some great resources in our chase.com. There are also great resources. Summa Wealth is a company that we follow a lot. They simplify a lot of the financial terms, which can sound very complex. And sharing with each other, take 5 minutes to plan your budget. Right? The small things, see an article, share it more broadly. For those of us who have kids, sit down at the dinner table and talk about it. Go and open a checking account for your child and teach them to save. Again, I'm going to end up saying all the same things, but it's like very small things make a big difference. Sometimes we feel like in order to make change and drive change, we have to do big things. And no. It's like, talk to your mom about this session, talk to your daughter, whatever, makes sense in your life.
I agree again, 1,000%. I think demystifying this conversation about financial wealth is key. I love that you're saying, have it at the dinner table, because historically speaking, maybe our parents or grandparents haven't talked about it for whatever reason. And so that creates ignorance and maybe even fear. And so I love that you're saying a simple dinner conversation or a simple, walk to the bank together to open a checking account. I mean, these are little things that you're saying, but I definitely see the huge impact that it has. And of course, we can't just expect to make a huge impact from the moment we start thinking about how to build financial wellness. So great. Thank you so much. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How has the pandemic impacted your company's ability to further financial inclusion and equity?
So I think a couple of thoughts come to mind. One, it's sad, but it's true, right? When we think about the racial wealth gap that existed pre-pandemic, it was a big gap. Pandemic only made things worse. I think what we've done as a response to that, right? Our commitment with the communities has been, I joined 24 years ago. We were already committed back then for I don't know how many years, right? But to help bridge that wealth gap, what we did was last October, we made a $30 billion commitment to bridge the racial wealth gap, in particular for Hispanics, Latinos, and Blacks. And the reason why we focus on these communities is because they were the most severely impacted by the effects of the pandemic. And as part of those $30 billion, which were incremental to everything else we're already doing as a firm, we focused a lot of that investment on the home ownership, right? We talked about how that is one of the key barriers for building wealth. So that includes focusing on revitalizing some of the affordable housing units, helping build new affordable housing units, helping keep, rent at affordable rates, also, refinancing and creating new home loans. The other part of that racial equity commitment also focuses on supporting minority depository investments, right? So that there can be more NCDFIs, so for more support to our communities. In addition to supporting business bankers, small business owners to have more access to capital, and focusing on our own internal population, right? So building a pipeline of diverse talent at all levels of the organization.
Great, and it's Miriam dropped in the chat box that she heard about that initiative on NPR. So great. It's nice to see that companies are taking initiatives to bridge gaps and use their influence to help tackle a lot of these really big, chewy situations, all of the isms that I say, the racism, sexism, all these things. So it's like, okay, so how can we hire more, practice inclusivity, and how can we really go out into the community? So thank you for highlighting that. I want to rewind a little bit because I got a private question based on your previous response about starting these conversations. How do you recommend starting these conversations? So you were saying maybe to have some conversations at the dinner table, or just to share with your family or community ways to practice financial wellness a little better. How do you recommend starting these conversations?
I'm going to give my own personal experience, and then I'm going to do a little commercial. There is actually an article on chase.com that talks you through 5 steps to have a conversation about finances. I think it depends on where your family is at, right? So for instance, one of my siblings was very determined that everything he knew was enough, right? So having a conversation with him on any topic I would have to start with, asking a question, how is that it, to open. Or if I'm going to start having a conversation with my kids, like with my kids, my husband and I would talk about, okay, here we were buying Thanksgiving dinner, right? That's so good. We are thankful that we can have that. But that means that we're not going to go to dinner on Saturday night because we spent it on Thanksgiving dinner. We opened a bank account for my son, and we spoke with him, and we said, okay, we're going to give you a bank account. You are 13 years old now. Here's how it's going to work. You're going to get an allowance. You got to save for what you want. But I think I'm giving you a very generic answer. It really depends on the circumstance. Sometimes it could be, just sharing an article or a video and having the conversation around it.
Great. Thank you so much. This person that messaged me privately says, thank you for responding to this question. They're awkward and difficult conversations, often because of, whether they're roommates or spouses. So anything to ease the tension, like how you said, maybe this sibling of yours thought they knew everything and it's hard to have a conversation. How do you break the ice with a roommate or with a spouse or something like that to talk about finances?
So first of all, I empathize. It's super hard. Thank you so much for asking this question. I think first of all is picking a time where it's great, like make sure everything is calm and all. And I would go in small bite-sized pieces, right? Talk about one thing, whether it be, we're spending too much on groceries, and approach, what I was looking, that, I went to this other supermarket. Can you believe we saved $50 this week? Isn't that awesome? And then open the conversation. If it's like I'm thinking with my brother, that's what I would have done, right? In a topic that is sensitive. It's small steps, and every step is a victory. Does that help?
I agree. Yes, that's very clear. Thank you so much. The empathy piece, right? Listening. And also it seems like you're kind of trying to help resolve by showing like, actually I went out of my way. I got some discounts in this case of spending too much money at a certain supermarket. So instead of just throwing everything on the table, kind of like, wow, this is the situation we're in. What do we do? And you don't really have an example of maybe which direction we should go. You're kind of doing some research before and saying, you know what, we usually get the zucchinis here and they cost half here. What do you think if we try something like that? So thank you for that. It might sound simple for some folks, but I think that especially for this person that wrote privately, they can be very tense conversations, and it makes us take further steps back from having these talks about financial wellness. So having that courage to bring the conversation, like you said, in bite-sized pieces, and maybe bringing a possible solution. Thank you so much. All right, so next question here. Do you think efforts at closing the racial wealth gap should focus more on eroding deeply rooted cultural perceptions and habits, or on spreading better education and information about financial wellness to Latinx families?
I actually think both. The second one, I think you get more immediate results, right? Because we are providing financial, it's very practical. Right? People learn more, they save more, we're giving resources, and that's great. For me, the first one is super important and much more complicated, right? I think there is a narrative that exists that sometimes gets portrayed by media or gets exacerbated in movies or in, you name it. That narrative is the one that we're working very hard on in order to change, right? Giving you a silly example, sometimes we hear about Hispanics, Latinos, we say, oh yeah, they dance salsa and they have struggles. Not that every Latino dance salsa have struggles, but sometimes we're better known for our culture or our struggles. There's so much more to us than that. Right? But people are going on with their days, and maybe that's the narrative. So I think we need to work extra hard to make sure that when we are talking about our community or other communities, we're representing the community as a whole. Yes, there are struggles, but so much resilience, right? Yes, there is culture, but so much, intellectual capital, so much, contributions to the economy. And I think that's what's going to take time. Even as I think about our own $30 billion racial equity commitment, this is not something, okay, done, let's go. Some of the systemic issues we're seeing, they're deeply rooted. We're in a journey, right? And it takes all of us to really change the narrative and the outcomes, which have been, like to your earlier point, like back to our colonization days, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got a lot of unlearning to do and a lot of new stories to tell and share. That keeps me hopeful, knowing that we always have time to unlearn some habits that might keep us shackled to the system that's not supporting us, or how to have conversations like this to maybe open up some new awarenesses. So I really appreciate you for sharing. So we've got a good question from Anna here, who writes, how do you measure success? And specifically, how is your company measuring its success on the impact in the community? Now, this is an interesting question because you did bring up, that things take time. And we live in such a, fast pace, productivity, everything needs to be, check, check, check. But when you're thinking of equity and inclusion and to really reap the benefits, how does one measure its success? So just to answer Anna's question here.
Yeah, and Anna, this is such an important question, right? We have, so for everything that is part of the $30 billion racial equity commitment, we have a specific metrics that we're targeting over the next 5 years, right? So as one example, 15,000 loans to small business owners. That's going to be success for the $30 billion racial equity commitment. But the way that we're going to measure success is going to change as the world evolves, right? Because it's not like, okay, 5 years, we're done, we met our metrics, and that's it. And I think success is probably going to look different over time.
Again, when we continue to unlearn and relearn, success will transform as we're doing that together. So I really love that. All right, Miriam writes, helping my mom navigate her retirement and Medicare had been overwhelming, as it's another area we both struggle to find resources and support. What resources do you recommend we start with to empower our parents' retirement while preparing for our own?
What I would say, and we can follow up with more resources because, for instance, Medicare, I'm not very knowledgeable about, but with retirement, we have some resources through ourownchase.com. And I would encourage speaking to a banker, right? So we have, as part of our racial equity commitment, we created community centers in locations that are highly concentrated by Hispanics, Latinos, and Black communities, right? And we are hiring 150 community managers to actually be part of these communities for that exact reason, right? Because when you're talking about retirement and Medicare, and you're talking about your mom, I mean, there is not anything more important than that, right? We're talking about our family. So that's why we want to be local. I would walk into a branch and have a conversation with a banker who can definitely help you.
Awesome. Thank you for that reference there. All right, time is flying. We've got just a little over 15 minutes. So I've got a couple more questions here. And if anyone here on the call wants to get in a question before our 15 minutes runs out, please drop them in the chat box. We want to hear from you. Okay, so moving on to this question here. I'm from Chile and I work remotely for a company in the US. Do you have any particular advice when it comes to negotiating my salary? As a Latina, I always find myself at a disadvantage when it comes to asking for more.
First of all, super hard. And thank you for being brave and asking that question. I think what you're talking about is real, right? It's very hard as a Latina or as Latinos to be very vocal about what we want. And I'm generalizing, of course, not every person who's Hispanic or Latino or Latina faces the same challenges, but we have to figure out a way of asking for what we want. Because if we don't, then we're starting from no as the answer, and we're going to end in no as the answer, right? I think as your goal is to have that conversation, have your little village of support, right? People that you can get advice from in terms of how to raise the conversation. ask, mentors how to approach your manager in terms of having that conversation, and be prepared to be a little uncomfortable. It's not, and I haven't done it perfectly every time, but it's important that you stand up and you sit down and you say what you want and you stop. I think we start explaining because, oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable. Oh, but if you don't mind, practice, 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 and go have that conversation. And remember that the reason why you're asking for a salary increase is not because anybody's doing you a favor, it's because you're working for it. I'll never forget one of my mentors. I moved to the US 20 years ago, and I got a really nice bonus on my first year in the US. And I thought, wow, I'm so grateful. Great. We have to be grateful. But I had this mentor who was a super senior American woman. And she told me, she said, Silvana, you're okay to be grateful, but you know that this bonus is a recognition of all your hard work. Nobody's doing you any favor. So I think sometimes when we focus on the rational part of what we're doing versus our heart, it actually helps too.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that equity is becoming more of a hot topic in the industry, and hopefully we don't leave it as a superficial hot topic. We really dive in deep to find some resolve and encouragement. And especially with technological advances, I hope, we've got a lot of room to grow. And since everything is becoming so new, I really feel passionate about speaking up for especially folks in the global South who might be working on their computers, let's say doing any kind of graphic design or programming or anything like that. And not their financial value is not being reciprocated because they're in the global South, when the digital space is international. So there's this conflict that I hope we can pop open together in this industry and really speak about it, because I think that equity is rooted in there. Otherwise, we're going to keep doing some things that keep us, stuck in the past. So, I'm ranting there a bit, but I think that, there's so many things that are changing, and so many opportunities to lead things in a nice direction instead of falling back on the default. I need a job. Okay, cool. I can do this from anywhere. And I won't ask questions and I won't ask for more. But these kinds of conversations, when we can open up and say, you know what, I got a bonus and my mentor said that I should be expecting that and not, feel like this happened by coincidence, and having more of those kinds of conversations to keep us encouraged. Otherwise, we have to have these holidays that are like Latina equal pay day. Well, let's not make that a holiday. Let's make that a norm so that we don't have to have a holiday. All right, I digress. So
well said. Well said. I like it.
Thank you. All right. So with that said, we've got a little over 10 minutes left, folks. We want to hear from you. So please drop any last minute questions or reflections in the chat box. And I do have one more question until then so we can see if someone wants to ask a live question here. All right. So in general, I know you've set the stage, you've walked us through your experience. You've touched on, things that you see happening tangibly in the community. What does financial wellness look like for Hispanics and Latino community in general? Just to kind of round off this, this conversation we've been having. So what does it look like for you? And how do you, let's just go further into the future. What do you hope to see in the future?
So on your first question, I think financial wellness we have less debt, more of us own homes, more of us go to college, complete our education, and do not have any loan debt lingering behind us. And even broader than that, that's actually, my real dream is that we are seen for who we are. Impact and all, right? Because this is a very powerful community, bias aside, but I do believe it, right? And I think you asked the last one, what's my dream for the future? I think I answered that, right? Yeah, and I think the dream for the future is really Latinos taking the place that we are meant to take in society and our contributions being valued, our differences being embraced, and us being able to feel like we can use our voices more.
Absolutely. I love that response. Again, active listening, empathy, and being proud of that resilience piece through all of the struggles, all of the, systemic oppression, all of the things that folks have had to endure, generationally speaking, speaking about it and listening to it and not trying to continue to be polarized. Yes, I love this vision of the future here. All right, so we've got some responses here in the chat box. I'm working on obtaining a loan to open my business, and our college debt may be a huge hinder. My husband and I have been out of school for 16 years. Any tips to networking and finding a mentor? So Vanessa, oh, sorry, these are two different Vanessas. I apologize. So the first question is about how college debt might be a huge hinder. How would you approach, finding a loan for a business considering college debt? And then another question would be any tips for finding a mentor?
Sure. So I'll take the first one first. You may need to separate the two, but what I would do is I would talk to a banker. We have, in many of our locations, we have business consultants, and the business consultants, that's exactly what they do. They meet with business owners that want to grow their business, that want to have access to capital, and they guide them through the steps on how to get there. Right. So I would start with a banker. And then I think on the second question, networking, I think the first thing networking is a very broad word. And I'm reacting in this way because when I moved here and people say you have to network, it gave me a panic attack. So that's why I'm saying this. But anyhow, I think that networking, in my mind, it really is about building new relationships. And I think that the way to do that is first to respect what is your own style. I do better in one-on-one. You put me in a place with 50 people, it's not comfortable, right? So think about, as you're networking, like who do you want to build relationships with, and make it about the other person. Right. So you, for some people, it may be going to an event and introducing yourself and establishing the relationships. But I think at the end of the day, it is more about learning what is true to you than it is about, a specific technique. Think about, okay, how do I build relationships today? What is my gift as I build relationships? And use that is uniquely yours to go build those relationships, thinking about, okay, who do I need to build relationships with, be strategic around it. And I think mentors, this is one that is such an important question, not that the other one is not, but this one, I think even more so, because what you're getting at is, we need to find mentors who actually we can relate to, right? Talking about mentors, I had this wonderful mentor that I gave an example of my bonus. And I had another mentor that was a super senior woman that was assigned to me by a program. And it was so scary every time I had to meet with her. So it was torture. So when you look to find mentors, I would say, one, anybody can mentor you. And it doesn't have to be an official mentoring relationship. It can be a peer. It can be somebody that works for you. It can be somebody that is higher up in the organization. And as you are working with different people, like find ways in which you can help them. All of my mentors, quite honestly, that were higher than me in the organization, the real ones were built that way, because I was working on something, I worked with them on something, and I offered my help. And in return, I was getting that mentorship. So I would say the more natural, the better. And always think about where you can add value. I think and I'm not saying that's your case, but where I see a lot of people failing in terms of finding a mentor is, oh, can you mentor me? And calling you to chit chat, right? It's about value. And of course, the relationship can come at a more personal level, but it may not start on a personal level.
That's great advice. So basically, it's a partnership, and it should be an authentic partnership. What can you give in return? Not just say, hey, I need you to, tell me all the secrets, and I'm going to sit back and take everything, this kind of taking, not giving. I really admire when folks speak about mentorship that way, because then it helps. Again, I think that's a part of the unlearning that we're doing. And so mentorship, it's actually both people are sharing something with each other. It's not just a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And also time is a big factor. If someone is saying, yes, I'll mentor you, or yes, I'll be your mentee, how do you spend that time? Do you just chit chat, or do you say, okay, I want to reach this goal. What advice can you give me? How can I help you? I love your response. Thank you so much. Thank you for dropping that last minute question in the chat box. It's a great way to round out this conversation. And actually, let's, since you mentioned mentorship and just how the ones that were really solid in your career allowed you to see things differently. If you could tell, your, let's say, let's call it your younger self. Let's go back, however long you want to go back, before you entered into the career space. What advice would you give yourself?
I think I would say, one, ask for help more. I don't know if this applies to all Latinos, but we're very resilient. And by being resilient and being able to figure things out, sometimes we figure too many things out on our own. So I would say to myself, asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And the second thing that I would say would be, don't take things so seriously. What seems to be a big problem at the moment may be a lesson that you're learning that's going to make you better over the long run. The amount of times early in my career that I thought, oh my God, now I'm going to be fired. And, I wasn't. And I look back and I'm like, okay, it wasn't that big of a deal. So I would say that too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That was my extra question that I wanted to throw in there. And Vanessa writes, great answer. Thank you. Puts a lot into perspective. You've given us a lot of perspective in this past almost hour. Time is running up. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing time with us and for sharing knowledge. Can you leave us with some food for thought before we end this conversation? So you set the stage, you took us on this journey, you're encouraging us in all these ways. Leave us with some food for thought for folks who don't identify as being a part of the Latinx community, because allyship, again, I think is something that, we can take a whole nother hour to talk about allyship. Mm-hmm. So for thought for, people who are in the community and people who are not in the community on how, we can lift each other up.
So I'm going to use a quote that my kids cannot stand how much they have to listen to it, but you didn't hear it from me, maybe from others. It's a quote that I live by from Nelson Mandela, which says, it was impossible until it was done. I think anything is possible. And as long as we believe in that, we can do anything we want. That's where I would leave you all with.
Awesome. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, we are giving you all a couple minutes back in your day. We've got folks writing in the chat box. Thank you so much. They relate with so much that you've shared. Thank you so much for a wonderful session and for sharing the wonderful energy. So thank you so much, Silvana. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. And I know that you mentioned a couple of resources throughout the conversation. Anything else you want to highlight as far as resources are concerned, where people can kind of open up some tabs now and start to look on your website, for example?
If you go to chase.com, financial journey, you're going to find some good resources, or metas financieras.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. So thank you so much. And